And I found the origin of addiction was a result of our inability to deal with life. And as many people say, on the terms that life gives us, and I really believe I'm not a fan of the genetic model. And if people are, please don't take it, that I'm some bad guy or whatever it might be. It's just my belief system, and everyone can have different beliefs. But, I don't believe in the genetic model. And the reason I don't, I believe that the genes can play a role in alcoholism for sure, but not the origin of addiction.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of I Love Being Sober, sponsored by Camelback Recovery, Arizona's preferred mental health and addiction treatment option to help newcomers on their path to recovery. If that's you or someone you know, then you're in the right place, because my name is Tim Westbrook, and I'm the CEO and founder of Camelback Recovery here in the always sunny and always sober Phoenix, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have helped thousands of people to stop their suffering and continue on their path to recovery. Today, I'm here with David Essel, MSOM. He is a #1 best-selling author 13 times. He's a counselor, executive coach, international speaker, radio, TV, and podcast host, sports psychology coach, and all-faith minister whose mission is to positively affect 2 million people or more every single day in every area of life, regardless of their current circumstances. David's newest book, endorsed by treatment center owners, doctors, and clients, is completely changing the world of recovery. David Essel's Permanent Alcohol and Life Recovery is so advanced and unique that people who never thought they could be free of any addiction are now free. David's work of 43 years is also highly endorsed by the late Wayne Dyer, Chicken Soup for the Soul's author Mark Victor Hansen, as well as many other celebrities in radio and TV networks from all over the world. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today with David. David, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here.
I love being sober with Tim.
Yes. Amen to that. Amen to that.
Well, it's great to be with you, Tim. And I want to first say this. As the owner, the director of a treatment center, to have me with you is such a gift that you're giving me, Tim. And I want you to know how important it is that I'm with you. Years and years as an addict and alcoholic, years now completely clean. And, we call it life recovery. We don't even call it anything else, And it's just so nice to be able to share messages with someone so influential who has helped thousands of people get sober. And I hope today's message is going to resonate just as deeply, Tim, as all the work that you've been doing and are currently still are doing.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here, David. And it's interesting. You say it's like, is it life recovery? Is it recovery? Am I still in recovery? Is it I'm Tim, I'm an alcoholic, or is it I'm Tim, I'm in long-term recovery? Like, what is it, right? And some people get caught up on it, and my belief is that people should say whatever it is. I don't know. It's like, if I say I'm Tim, I'm an alcoholic, I'm Tim, I'm an addict, then that, like, I'm telling my subconscious mind one thing, which is that I'm an addict or I'm an alcoholic. Or what should I be telling my subconscious mind? I mean, that's a completely different story. And I believe we're going to get into the subconscious mind as we move through this interview.
Amen. It's a huge part of recovery. It's a huge part of life recovery. It's a huge part of happiness. So yeah, we're going to hit it, Tim. Absolutely.
Yeah. You're as happy as you make your mind up to be, right?
Totally. 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. What is an MSOM?
A master's degree in sports psychology and counseling is where I got my master's degree, and started out with athletes almost entirely, the world of bodybuilding and athletics. And then in 1990, I did a massive switch, Tim. I got burned out. Now, I still work with major league athletes, and we have a brand new book coming out for life mastery and mental mastery for professional athletes. That's probably about a month away from coming out. So we still work with that. But then in 1990, everything switched, and it was a personal crisis that I went through. I had a failed suicide attempt in 1990. And it was through that I ended up gratefully and thankfully understanding what the root of all of my addictions were. I started at 12, and it was obviously escaping some of my reality that I couldn't handle. But in 1990, Tim, we found out some things that were just mind blowing. And I had the most incredible psychiatrist and therapist that I worked with for about a year on the side, and they started diagnosing these things. They were saying, do you know that you've had clinical depression? Do you know that you have generalized anxiety disorder? Do you know you have ADD? Do you know you have ADHD? And I say all these things because we didn't have a clue. The reason I started drinking at 12 was because I was a very angry child. I was emotionally unregulated. I was outrageously sensitive. Growing up in a family where my mom and dad were incredible parents, but we had the emotion to share was one of happiness. And if you were sad, angry, insecure, jealous, resentful of a friend or whatever, there was no room to share it. Looking back now with the wisdom of all these years, and I look back and say, I was screaming to allow these quote unquote negative emotions out that aren't negative emotions. Oh, they're just part of life.
Right.
And then I found at 12 that, holy cow, having a 16-ounce beer, I had no anger. I had no resent. I had nothing. And so in 1990, when they told me we had all these things, I went back to, in the 50s when I first started going to doctors, my parents taking me to doctors because I was an irritable little kid. They didn't think that a child that young could be depressed or anxious, or, we didn't even know what ADD and ADHD was in the 50s.
Right.
And so they said that it was my allergies. So they told my parents it's simply allergies. Well, what do you do with allergies? Well, you can take allergy medicine, but that didn't help anything. And so in 1990, everything was explained to me, Tim. And I found the origin of addiction was a result of our inability to deal with life. And as many people say, on the terms that life gives us, and I really believe I'm not a fan of the genetic model. And if people are, please don't take it, that I'm some bad guy or whatever it might be. It's just my belief system, and everyone can have different beliefs. But, I don't believe in the genetic model. And the reason I don't, I believe that the genes can play a role in alcoholism for sure, but not the origin of addiction. Unless you're born with fetal alcohol syndrome, most of us aren't coming out of our mother's womb craving alcohol. And so there's a small percentage, unfortunately, that are born with fetal alcohol syndrome, and they do struggle and they go through withdrawal, and they're at a disadvantage at life, just like an opiate born baby, which are some of the most horrendous things to see. If you've ever been in a hospital, a pediatric hospital, and see a baby just born that's an opiate addict, it's unbelievably disheartening. You just can't understand it. But then in 1990, Tim, everything came together. Like, I understood that without knowing about the depression, anxiety, and these other disorders, I was just trying to survive. And through the use of alcohol and drugs, I was able to calm the brain that was completely out of control. And even though I was very successful on the covers of magazines and traveling the world as a speaker, a motivational speaker, and all that stuff, I was really struggling. And I didn't know what it was. And, as guys, now it's changing. In 1980, when I started my clinical practice, we had 10% of men in our practice. Now it's 40%. It's almost 50%. We're almost at halfway mark with
Right.
men and women, which is great because men need to come to the forefront and to have other men to be real with. Now, some men can be very real with a female counselor as well, and that's totally fine. But what I find is that a lot of men don't even understand, what's the cause of depression? Well, one of the greatest causes is unhealed anger, unhealed rage, and unhealed sadness are three of the biggest causes of depression. So when we start to go to the origin, which we do in our book, David Essel's Permanent Alcohol and Life Recovery, Tim, we spend a lot of time helping people go to the origin. Because addictions are not logical and base, we need to find, in my opinion, the logical origin. So then we can go, oh, no wonder why I do this insane crap every night or every weekend or whatever. It's because I have this that I've never healed. Or, I'm insecure, or I have low self-confidence and low self-esteem. So peer pressure draws me into these people that love the world of addiction. And now that I know the origin, I can find a professional and hopefully start to heal.
So all of those things that you just mentioned, the depression, the anger, the rage, So what I think of the if you take it a layer deeper than that, really it's trauma. It
Yes,
all stems from
absolutely.
trauma, right?
And that's a great word to use, Tim, because it covers everything. Now the only caution with the word trauma is that a lot of people, when they think of trauma, may think of really huge things
Mhm.
as like sexual abuse or, being in the military and seeing someone blown up, like that would be a traumatic experience, right? But trauma can also be neglect from 0 to 6, or neglect from 0 to 17 or 18, even that can be a traumatic experience. Growing up in a household where love is not expressed, you don't see it, can be a traumatic experience. Growing up without a voice for your negative emotions. I always do this because there's no such thing as a negative emotion. We don't have emotions for no reason. I mean, rage can be a great emotion if utilized at the right time. There was a story I just told a client the other day about the power of adrenaline as a drug in the body and the power of rage. And there was a story a couple of years ago of an 85-pound woman. She was in her 60s that lifted a 4,000-pound car off of her husband. Now, this was a frail woman who, through adrenaline and the rage that she had created inside herself, as the article said, allowed her to lift the car up enough for the husband to roll out. So, I don't like to get into labeling emotions as bad or good, because they could be a good emotion. But the word trauma is awesome. And if people were to look it up and define it in the dictionary and get a really good understanding, trauma comes in many levels. And even the lower level traumas over years can equal the end result of a high trauma, Tim.
Right. Trauma. I mean, you're right. Many people think of trauma and they think of something major, which you've got the big, and I've heard it explained as little T or big T.
Right,
And
right.
the little T can be someone cut you, they cut you off on the freeway.
Yeah,
That can be traumatic.
that's right. Exactly.
Someone spits on
And
you. That
what
could be. I mean, it's like there's so many different. It doesn't matter. Like we all face trauma, like on a consistent basis, and throughout our lifetimes, we've all experienced lots of trauma.
Yeah. And right now, during the 4 years of the pandemic, this has been a traumatic experience for the human race, for God's sake. We see, and Tim, you probably see it at the center. Over the last 4 years, we have seen the biggest increase in addictions in our private practice than we have seen in 43 years. I mean, it's mind blowing what's going on. And let me resort back just for a second to trauma to give another example. I have a client, we just ended our work of about a year and a half together, and her trauma was growing up in a perfectionistic home.
Right.
She couldn't get a high. If it wasn't an A+, it was not acceptable. If she took the driving course and didn't get a 99, it wasn't acceptable. So this poor woman was raised in anxiety, which is another word for trauma. She was expected in a perfectionist household to be an extremely perfectionist, and it got so bad that she became agoraphobic, meaning that she couldn't leave her home feeling comfortable, and she couldn't drive anymore in her late 40s, Tim. So, we have to look at that word trauma and expand it, because, a lot of people wouldn't think living in a perfectionistic home with a perfectionistic mother and father would be that big of a deal unless you're there, unless you go through it for 18 years. And then you find out this is pure trauma.
Yeah. You talked about men. I mean, essentially, what I heard you say is that men used to not really be able to have feelings, right? And not only did, and I don't know if it's necessarily men weren't allowed, but yeah, I mean, it's like men don't cry, men aren't depressed, men just like get up and go to work.
Yeah,
And
right.
there's really no room to complain. There's no room to cry. There's no room for emotions, which then the emotions are pressed down. That leads to depression.
Mhm.
But now it's become, and I can tell you that me growing up, I wasn't raised in an environment where men, I mean, men don't cry.
That's
And
right.
it's changed over the years significantly, both for myself and even like my dad was my example. I mean, I've seen my dad go from not being vulnerable and not having any emotions to now today, he's completely changed. It's completely different. And it's really like a cool thing to see. And it's cool to see just universally that more and more men have emotions,
Yeah.
and intimacy. That speaks to intimacy. Like my idea of intimacy was sex, which
Right.
that's not really intimacy. That's one form of intimacy, but
Yeah.
there's lots of other forms of intimacy, and intimacy really is connecting with someone beyond the surface, being vulnerable, and
Yeah.
that's like an important part of life, in my opinion.
It is. And in the world of recovery, it's an important part of life recovery, right? For
Yeah.
people to understand, that being intimate means sharing, it means risking, it means what you use the word being vulnerable, being open, being honest. And, in the world of addiction, we can say, yeah, I'll talk to my partner, I'll talk to my best friend about this next week, but, I'm just going to have a drink right now and relax type
Right.
of a thing.
That's the solution. That's going to make me feel better right now for like the next 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly right. And then we never get to the conversation, and then it gets buried, and whatever gets buried or submerged grows, and resentments grow, and all that kind of stuff. And we take away the substance, or we take, what if it's a behavioral addiction, we take away the behavior. If it's a substance addiction, if it's a thought addiction, we take away the thought, and then we allow ourselves to be with ourselves, which is one of the scariest things for someone who's struggling with addiction is to be alone on a Friday night without sugar. I'm going to make that point very clear, without alcohol, without heroin, without, vaping, THC, without whatever it might be. We can see how intimate we are with ourselves in silence. If you can be at peace in silence, I always say to people, when you walk in the door, the last thing to do is to turn on any noise, any TV, any music, anything. Get to know yourself. Get to know
Mhm.
your feelings. And if you have the TV on in the background, you're not going to know what you're feeling. If you have your favorite music on, you're not going to know what you're feeling. So we give these kind of exercises, Tim, so we can help educate people on how to learn how to feel, because we're usually not taught that. And we're also, teaching people that it's okay to feel insecurity, and we don't have to cover it up by vaping or having a cigarette or whatever else. It's okay to feel frustrated. And it's okay to learn how to emotionally regulate your frustration. Ram Dass, an amazing mentor of mine for a number of years, he died a couple of years ago, but he was an incredible teacher, just an amazing, amazing teacher. I remember one of the first times I had, got out of the world of counseling and got graduated and all of that kind of stuff. And I was talking about emotional regulation, and he's listening. And then all he says, he said, "Is that what you learned in school?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, let me give you an example that might even help yourself and your clients more." I mean, and Tim, the one thing too is that he was so incredibly wise, intelligent, and smart, yet he never made you feel underneath him. He would always say, "Well, here's an idea. Let me hear what you think about this." Instead of saying, "Oh, you shouldn't have said that. You should say this." I
Mhm.
love that about him. But he gave this story. Two people are going to the airport. This is about emotional regulation or non-emotional regulation. They both leave 3 hours early. They're going in separate cars, separate roads, but they get a couple miles from the airport. There's a massive traffic accident. And so all of a sudden on the radio, it says there's a 3 hour delay to the airport. Now, both people are going to miss their flight. The non-emotionally regulated person smashes the dashboard, says a bunch of profanity, gets on the phone, starts calling friends and saying, "This is so screwed up. The first time I leave 3 hours early, and they just turn it into a mind fest," right? They just go as negative as they can, and it's not their fault, and it's everyone else's fault. Now, the person that is emotionally regulated also smashes the dashboard, also says one profanity, and then gets on the phone, changes the flight, calls the business they were coming to speak to and said they're coming in the next day, calls their girlfriend, wife, boyfriend, husband, whatever it might be, takes the time to listen to relaxing music while they're waiting for the traffic to move. That's the difference between someone emotionally unregulated or regulated. And I believe in the world of recovery, we're all shooting for to become more emotionally regulated. It's not about not being frustrated because traffic is backed up and you're missing your flight. It's about learning how to handle that frustration in a healthier way. As an addict or alcoholic, the very first thing we're thinking of in that case is, damn it, where's the closest bar? I've got 3 hours to kill. This is ridiculous. I don't need to deal with this crap. Let me go have a drink, right? The emotionally regulated person does just the opposite, which is what we teach, which is what I know you teach, Tim, and it's all about getting the underneath into the bottom, the origin, the regulation that I think can really turn this world of recovery around. You had mentioned something earlier that I always have the same question asked of me. David, are you a recovered alcoholic and addict? Are you a recovering alcoholic and addict, or are you an alcoholic and addict? I get that all the time. And I say, honestly, I'm none of it. I'm just David Essel.
Right.
Who does work in the field of recovery, right, Tim? I mean, I don't have any, there's no more labels to use.
And you can even take it further and say, I'm just a man.
Yeah, I'm just a guy. Yeah.
It's a guy. I'm just, because the name is a label too.
Yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to give Tim a compliment here, okay? Because I was in treatment centers for my addiction. I've interviewed and been interviewed by treatment centers in the past, not with our new book, because our new book is very different. But one of the things, if you notice Tim in his responses, is his open-mindedness as an owner of a treatment center. He is not stuck in a system. He is stuck in success, however it comes. I'm reading this energy from Tim, and I'm looking at the way he reacts to me and the questions he asks. And what I just said is true. So my hat is off to you, Tim, because a lot of times treatment center owners get stuck in this really narrow, blinded vision. And your vision seems to be, you can't see my hands, because that's how big your vision is. I can tell.
Right. Well, thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. And I feel like where I'm at today is I've done a lot of work, obviously.
Mhm.
Or I don't know if it's obvious, but I think it's obvious. And like, I love my life today. And it's not just recovery. It's not just going to a treatment center. It's not just a 12-step program. There's so much more to it. And I love what you said. You're talking about getting to know yourself and getting to feel feelings. And like, I've been sober since 2011. So I've been sober over 10 years. And over the past few months, I've incorporated some I've been meditating a lot throughout my entire recovery. But recently I've been meditating and I've just been doing quiet as opposed to the guided. I like the guided meditations as well. And I've been doing my best to meditate for 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening, and just to get quiet and just to be with myself. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
It's incredible, Tim. And when people who are struggling find the peace, and it may take you starting off with 2 minutes of meditation, Tim's up to 15 minutes twice a day. You had mentioned guided meditation. I believe, Tim, that everyone should start with guided. I think it's especially the addict's brain. Oh my God, our brains are so screwed up. It's like they're all over the place, for God's sake. And so to expect someone, when I was first introduced to meditation in 1986, I couldn't do it because someone was telling me how to do it, but it wasn't guided. She had written down directions, use this mantra, every time a thought comes up, say this, but I couldn't do it. My brain was just always all over the place. Yeah. Then I found the guided meditation, and for 365 days, I did a guided meditation of 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then I started to feel the benefits of meditation after doing it. And then I went into what's called transcendental meditation, which to me is one of the most beautiful forms of meditation. It's the most beautiful form I've ever found. It doesn't mean it's the only one, but it's one that I really love. And then I got an opportunity to interview the founder of Transcendental Meditation, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who was a mind-blowing interview, Tim, just one of the most intelligent men in the world. And I have found over the years that, even with the ADD and ADHD, it doesn't matter what thing we have. We've done a podcast on how to meditate with ADD, which is different than how to meditate with ADHD, which is different than how to meditate without either. So, we want people to be inclusive. We want them to know, and here I go back to life recovery, right? Like the supplements you take in recovery can be crucial to brain chemistry. And we go into that in the book. The practices from aromatherapy, one of the most powerful practices that we still don't give it enough talk. In the 60s and 70s, aromatherapy was talked about all the time. And now it's not as common. And I don't know why. Lavender. The essential oil of lavender, they have done studies that shows with 10 deep breaths out of a small little bottle can bring instant relief to anxiety in 35 to 40 seconds. Now, are we talking about healing anxiety? No, we're talking about just bringing that level down so that you're conscious, logical in the moment. So we have all those types of things in the book that we share for people to get a leg up and realize, hey, we're not just going to talk about alcohol, heroin, pot addiction, social media addiction, video addiction. We're not just going to talk about the addictions. We're going to talk about the changes that if you make these can make letting go easier and staying in recovery for life easier as well.
Nice. Okay, so I've got a question that I was going to ask earlier, and so I'm going to get to it now. What gives you the right to claim you are an expert on addiction recovery?
What a beautiful question. Well, first of all, 30 years of experience gives me a great option to say, wow, I know what it's like to be an addict. So 30 years as an addict. I never go into the years I've been clean and sober. I just don't think it's relevant to me, for me anyway, because Tim, I've worked with people with 30 years sober that are so dry drunk, so angry, so irritable that they're not even sober, for God's sake. You might as well go back and start drinking or shooting up again. And I mean that sincerely. People will brag about their 30 years of recovery while they're tearing someone down, or whatever it might be. And I just don't buy into that. So my first justification or foundation of being an expert in recovery is the fact that I wasn't one for 30 years and that I avoided my reality for 30 years. And I made excuses for my addictions for 30 years. So that's the first thing. I think having that kind of a background is incredibly important for me. Now, I will tell you, Tim, prior for me getting sober myself, I couldn't believe how many addicts were coming to me and we were getting them sober while I'm still an active alcoholic. Now, how can that happen? Well, I can tell you right off the bat, they trusted me. They felt energetically, even though I never told anyone I was an alcoholic or an addict, never, ever, ever until I was well into my recovery did I ever mention it. But they felt a connection. They felt they could trust me. They heard the words that I used were the words of an addict, were the words of an alcoholic. So they trusted me and they got clean. So I'm going to say that this is the beginning of it. And then the third part is going to be crucially important. In 1990, as I mentioned earlier, after the failed suicide attempt, when I found out all of these medical conditions, mental challenges that I had, I went into the deepest dive ever of understanding the origin, the word that you used earlier, trauma. I went through all the experiences and studied deeply with PTSD, with sexual abuse. I just really did a deep dive. Still am in that deep dive from 1990. So I would say right now that the expertise comes from the years of use combined with the years of intense study. There are people like Dr. Gabor Mate that I take my hat off to, that has been such a great teacher for me. Dr. Hyla Cass out of Los Angeles, an amazing, phenomenal psychiatrist that is fully engorged in the world of amino acid therapy. Dr. Stan Meyerson, who in 1990 taught me almost everything I know about amino acid therapy in regards to brain chemistry regulation through addiction. So I have these mentors, Tim, that have taken me into places I never could have gone by myself, that give me that ability to say, yes, I really do know what I'm talking about in the world of addiction recovery and all addictions. I mean, there isn't anything we haven't worked with. I'm comfortable working with all addictions. And the two tools that we never use in our recovery process is shame or guilt. It doesn't matter what you tell me. You'll never see my facial expression change. You'll never see me go, oh my God, are you kidding me? You'll never hear anything like that whatsoever. So my compassion is another vehicle that I use to help people recover. And if individuals could hear me in a session with a client, they would be blown away. They would literally be blown away at how we handle sessions, because we use so much love, Tim. We use so much understanding that the more people are loved and understood, the more they're going to share and the quicker they're going to heal. So we just break open those gateways and say, come on, share it, put it on the table. Let me love you. Let me hold your hand. Let me be as a support system, but also as an accountability partner. Because if you don't do the homework we give you every week, within 2 weeks, you'll be out of the program. So I'm going to be loving and kind and supportive and compassionate, but I'm going to hold your feet to the fire because I want you to heal.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. People want safety and security. And so giving them the safety and the security. And, I actually just went through an intensive last week, and with a woman named Tara Holbrook. So Tara Vista, it was amazing. And I learned more about my younger self. And so I realized some of my triggers, and I've known what some of my triggers are, but it's like that's what happens when we get angry, when we're in fear, whenever we have these feelings that come up. Typically, we've got to go back, and this is my experience. This is for me, anyways. I have to go back to the little boy
Yes.
that was
Yes.
12 years old, 13 years old, 8 years old, 5 years old, 3 years old. And then once we identify, then we can start processing. And I'm looking forward to getting to a place where I'm not triggered. I don't know if that's ever going to happen.
Tim, you know what? Well, I don't know the answer for you either, but I do know this. Your intention says you will, and your action by going to the workshop says you will. And if you apply what you learn there daily, you will. I don't think there is even a question in my mind that
Right.
anyone that follows the process that you and I are talking about will heal 100%, right? You know, and again, going back to the word we use that you're saying just in a different word is that we have to find the origin of those dysfunctional times in our existence. And it's all, and well, I shouldn't say always, Tim, because I hate to be too absolute, but most of the time it's 0 to 18.
Yeah.
Almost every client I've ever worked with, the traumatic experience happened between 0 and 18. And remember that word trauma can be isolated in a family. Mom and dad don't want to hear, or mom doesn't want to hear, or dad doesn't want to hear, and all of your emotions are stuffed. You know, when I work with parents that have children, you know, parents can believe they're saying the best, and they have the greatest well-meaning. But I'll give an example. You know, I'm working with parents and they have a 14-year-old little girl that was just dumped by her boyfriend to go to her best friend. Now he's dating her best friend. And she is crushed for two reasons. One, she was in love with this young man. And two, now he's with her best friend, which means she can't communicate with her best friend, which means she not only lost a boyfriend, but she lost her best friend.
Mm-hmm.
So her parents are coming in and they're saying we can't console her. There's nothing they're saying, she's out of control. This is abnormal. And I said, well, what are you saying? And here's the thing for parents to listen to. Well, we told her the truth. Jimmy isn't that great of a guy. There's better boys out there. Madeline was your best friend, but you don't have best friends for life. And sometimes they only last a short period of time. Oh, honey, you'll find someone new tomorrow. And so what they're doing is they're taking her sadness, her anger, her disappointment, and shoving it down her throat. They are not giving her a voice. She has no place for a voice. So as I work to help parents retrain their parenting skills, we come up with a statement like this. Honey, we are so sorry. What emotions are you feeling in regards to Jimmy leaving you? What's going on? Are you mad? Are you sad? And I'll tell you, even with teens, we encourage parents to feed emotions because even at a 14-year-old, they may not know. Are you sad? Are you mad? Are you angry? Are you resentful? Are you jealous? Are you insecure? We go through all of these emotions so the child can start to tap into what they're feeling because, Tim, you and I as children may not have tapped into our feelings. I know I didn't. I tapped into negativity because I didn't know what else to do. I tapped into anger very well because I didn't know what else to do. So we're encouraging parents now to get to the feeling level with their children and allow them to express. Don't tell them that everything's going to be okay. Tomorrow's a new day. That doesn't work. That again is stuffing feelings. So we are teaching people how to allow their partners, their children, their next door neighbors, whoever it is, to have feelings and not have to save them. You don't have to save them. You have to allow them to express. And in expressing, that's the way you save.
Give them one of those feelings, those emotions wheels. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, exactly.
I mean, we used that last week, and I've seen that many times. It's a great, easy little a way to see all the different feelings, and feelings stem from different feelings, and feelings are derivatives of different feelings. What are there, like seven primary feelings, and then all the other feelings are just derivatives of those feelings?
Exactly.
Basically.
Yeah.
What is the true cause of any and all addictions?
Our inability to deal with life, period. That's it. We don't know how to deal with peer pressure, insecurity, anger, rage, resentments. We may not know how to deal with boredom. Oh, that's a biggie in the world of addiction. Overwhelm, perfectionism, procrastination, all of these emotions and characteristics are the cause of all addictions. And then, of course, we go to trauma, right? Underneath it all, there's some kind of traumatic experience that's happening. I got to go back to Gabor Mate. I think this guy is just, so brilliant because he's one of those few people standing out on a limb. And anyone that doesn't know him, please grab his books. And he's also extremely vulnerable, which I love about him. He talks about how he screwed up in his marriage. He talks about how he's put too much time into his work and wasn't there for A, B, C, D, or E. He is one of the most vulnerable, brilliant men I've ever met. And, his whole gig in the world of addiction is the wound theory, is that we all have something we haven't learned how to deal with. Now, the cool thing is, and this is why I don't believe in the genetic theory of alcoholism, is that there is, as far as I know, Tim, and you can educate me if you know of something else, but I have yet to hear of a universal drug, a universal surgery, or a universal anything medically, even reprogramming our genetics, that has been found to cure addiction.
Correct.
I haven't found a thing. And yet millions of people get recovered and sober for life every year. Mm-hmm. So that tells me it has nothing to do with genetics. Now, if we get to the genetic link of the genome,
well, there is generational trauma.
Well, epigenetics.
Right.
Epigenetics. Yes, I agree with you. Mm-hmm. But not a genetic link that they have found, not a gene that says, oh my God, this baby has this gene at birth, they're going to become an alcoholic. We don't have that. Now, if you have the genome for alcoholism, which only means you have the potential, it doesn't do anything until you consume alcohol. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have a role. It's dormant. I had a client that at 44, now she came from a huge family of alcoholism, massive family of alcoholism. She had never drank until 44. At 44, she came home one night and there was a note on the table and a package underneath it. And she reads the note and the note said, please sign the divorce papers in the package. That's all it said. She had no idea it was coming. She screamed so loud that her neighbor came running over and found her hysterically crying. And she read the note and the neighbor ran back to her house and grabbed 2 bottles of wine and came back. And they sat and finished the 2 bottles of wine. That woman ended up being hospitalized 6 months later and had the highest blood count in her county ever recorded to survive. Now, she had the gene. It was never activated until she drank. And then once she drank, it went through the roof. So I'm not saying that genetics doesn't have any role. I'm just saying it doesn't have a role in the origin of the reason we begin. That's all I'm saying there, Tim.
Understood. Why does the current model for addiction recovery have a 90% failure rate?
Man, I love this question. So many of the programs that are out there today are based solely on a program created 80 years ago that's never been updated. And that is the 12-step program. A 90% failure rate, a 10% success rate. And what that means is someone that goes into an AA meeting today, the odds of them being sober 365 days from now are 10%. 90% of those individuals will not be sober in 365 days. Now, I ask everyone the same question all the time. What car dealership is still working successfully with the principles from 80 years ago? That they're using manila folders and file cabinets and a rotary phone to sell cars, and they're doing really well. Mm-hmm. And the answer is none. And in our book, we reach out to the 12-step organization and we say, hey, we are willing and ready to help you update your program. My Lord, there's so much in the world of brain chemistry, neuroscience, epigenetics, you name it, that has gone on in the last 80 years that gives us a totally different approach to recovery. I mean, Tim, if I look at what I knew 35, 40 years ago, and what I know now in regards to recovery, it's night and day. It's not even on the same page. Right. 30 years ago, I wasn't telling people about trauma. I wasn't telling people about life recovery. I wasn't doing any of that kind of stuff. I wasn't going into origin. I wasn't going into 0 to 6, 7 to 14, 14 to 18 like we do today. We weren't doing any of that. And our success rate was fine, but it can't match anywhere where it as good as it is today, my Lord. And so what we say to these organizations is that it's okay to update, and everyone updates, and let us help you. And I bet if, and I don't know your opinion, Tim, but if the 12-step organization reached out to you or Gabor Mate or Hyla Cass or anyone else I know, I'm guessing that everyone said, sure, we would help you because there's so much out here. One of the things that we recommend that I've done on podcasts is that we think all 12-step sponsors should be certified as addiction recovery coaches at the very least. A sponsor is doing the best they can, but they're doing the best they can what they learn from another person, not a professional. So if they come to your center, they're being taught by people who are professionals, who are being trained and have been trained in the world of addiction recovery. And I'm not saying that sponsors are bad people at all. I mean, sponsors have the greatest intentions in the world. And I'll tell the story of my sponsor in a second, who I love him to this day. But I really think that they need to be trained much more so than just by the organization, once again, because the organization is using principles from 80 years ago. And I think that's why we have such a low success rate. But I'm really quickly, when I was in 12-step meetings, I went 120 straight days. I went to a treatment center. I promised my therapist, Kevin, I'll never forget his name, even though it's forever ago, that when I get out, even though I'm not a big fan of 12-step meetings, I said, he goes, go to 90 days. I said, no, I'm going to 120. I'm that type of a person. So I went to my 120 days, and people were coming up and wanting to be my sponsor. And I'm listening to what they're saying in the meetings, and I'm just not connecting. And I think I have 4 days left of my 120-day commitment. And I'm a Saturday meeting, 10 a.m. I was going 7 days a week, never missed. And they're going around the room and, hi, I'm Mary. I'm an alcoholic. I'm Bill. I'm an alcoholic, blah, blah, blah. And they come to this guy and he goes, hi, I'm Phil. And I am grateful to be here. And I'm like, oh my God, where's this guy been? You're like, that's what I want to hear. I want to hear someone who's not saying I'm an alcoholic when they have 22 years of recovery underneath their belt, for God's sake. So I waited after the meeting because all I'd say is, hi, I'm David. That's all I would say. I would not say I'm an alcoholic because I wasn't drinking. I was working a program. I was out of a recovery center like yours, Tim. I was working with a recovery expert 1 day a week. I'm going to 12-step meetings. I'm not going to call myself an alcoholic. And we go outside and I go, I got to talk to you. I said, is there any way you could, I only have 4 days left here, but I'd like to go through the program with a real grounded sponsor, and you sound grounded. And he started laughing. He goes, I know, because I said, I'm grateful. I said, you're right. I've never heard that before. Mm-hmm. He said, great. So I worked with Phil, and I worked with him once a week for 4 weeks. We did a really intense dive into the program. I got everything positive that I could get out of it. And I walked away knowing that if I'm going to work with people that want to attempt to go to any 12-step meeting, I'm going to educate them on how to go. And I'm going to warn them about things that are being said that we want to be very careful of accepting. The other day, I started with a new gentleman, porn addiction, which has been huge since the pandemic. I never, Tim, in 43 years, I bet we've had, I shouldn't say I bet, I know, we've had more porn and sex addicts in the last 4 years than I had in the 39 years before that. I mean, they have just come streaming in. And, this gentleman came in and he said, well, I'm going to be working with you. He said, I'm signing up for a year. I really think that I need 12-step programs as well. And I said, that's fine. Go, and go to your first one. I want you to write down everything that you understood and you think is healthy. Anything you have questions on, write down. So he came in and I said, how'd the meeting go? And he said, well, I have a question. He said, I'm not sure this makes me feel comfortable. And I said, what's that? He said, well, there's a minister who's leading it. And he said, hi, I'm minister, whatever. I was born a sex addict. I was a sex addict yesterday. I'm a sex addict today, and I'll be a sex addict for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. Tim, how much hope does that give someone walking into a meeting? Very first thing they hear, and so I asked him, I said, well, does that sound logical to attend a meeting on recovery where you're told you're never going to heal? Because that's what you were just told.
Right.
You're never going to heal. I said, I don't want to be a part of a program that tells me I'm never going to heal. I don't want to be a part of a program that does that. So I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. If you want to keep going, you can. But every time you hear a statement like that, I want you to write the reverse on a tab of paper that you're going to bring in with you. anything that they say that logically doesn't make sense. You're not going to be a sex addict for life. And the interesting and the sad thing, Tim, is, and this really hurt my soul. He ended up going for 8 weeks and then he stopped going. But he told me that every week there were guys that had been going to this minister, and I'm not just going to blame him, but going to a meeting, and they were relapsing every other week. Now, the good news is that they were being honest. But the bad news is if you're sitting in a room of people that are constantly relapsing, again, is that the positive reinforcement that we want in the world of addiction recovery? And my question is, why are they relapsing? Well, if I'm told I'm always going to be a sex addict, I'm always going to be an alcoholic, I'm always going to be a heroin addict, I'm always going to be a gambler, I'm always going to be a whatever, I have both feet out the door, Tim. I don't have just one foot out the door. I have both feet expecting relapse.
Yeah. On that note, I know, like, for me, I'm one of the very few that never relapsed. I got sober and I've never had a drink or a drug since. And I think in my mind, I don't drink. I don't do drugs. It wasn't, I'm trying to quit. It wasn't, and going to meetings, I still, went through, hey, I'm Tim, I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic, whatever. But truly, like, deep down, it was, no, I don't drink. And if somebody would ask me, it wasn't, I'm trying to stop. It was, I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't do drugs. And that's how it's always been. And I think that is really, it's my identity. It's changing my identity. So if someone, that's the key, is changing the identity and believing, like, hey, this is who I am. So I think listening to the minister saying I'm an addict, I'm always going to be an addict, I'll always be it's like, yeah, I think listening to that, especially for a newcomer, could give them the wrong message.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to be able, in my subconscious mind, if I'm constantly telling my subconscious mind that I'm an addict, then how am I ever going to heal?
And Tim, this is one of the major problems we have in all the meetings, and I'm not just going to nail 12-step. I'm not really nailing them. I'm just saying that, there's a benefit. Let me tell you this. The greatest thing I love about the 12-step program is walking into a freaking room and being vulnerable and honest. I think that is the number one benefit of the 12-step program. You're walking into a room of possible strangers that you don't know. You're afraid as hell that you might run into someone you know. And I'm going to tell you, that's what happened to me when I came back from the treatment center and was in my hometown, and I'm going to a meeting. I'm going, pray to God I don't see anyone I know. Like that. Right. Totally forgetting that if they're there, they're just like me.
Yeah, right? Yeah, they're just like you. Yeah.
And Tim, the greatest thing happened. Across the room is a business executive that I had done work with, and I go, oh my God, I can't let him see me. Like, I'm freaking out at this meeting, right, totally forgetting that he's an alcoholic or an addict or something. And so I wait and I BS with this person sitting next to me, hoping that he's going to be gone. I look and he's gone. I said, oh my God, thank you. I come out of the building, there he is next to my car. And I go, no. And it was awesome. He gave me a big hug and he said, welcome, brother. It's so good to see you. And I said, oh my Lord, like, how long have you been here? And so that was kind of cool, that I had that kind of reunion. But, there's too many of the stereotypical statements that, I just get very nervous about for my clients hearing on a regular basis and accepting as reality when they're not reality. You mentioned, Tim, about, never relapsing, neither for myself. And I want to tell something really brief about how powerful permanent life and alcohol recovery is. And I use the word permanent, just like you said, I don't drink. That's called permanent. Okay, gang, that's what it means. When you say, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, I don't drink, that means it's permanent. You're not just saying I'm doing it one day at a time, right, today. And I've got a great statement about the one day at a time, which I do not believe in, as a matter of fact. And this may rattle some souls. And if it does, you'll understand why at the end of the story. So imagine this. You make this very stereotypical guy meets a woman. They date for 6-8 months. She falls totally in love with him. He falls totally in love with her. And he says, he goes, this is it. And he looks at her and he gets down on his knee and he looks up and he says, honey, and she's freaking out, Tim, right? She's going, oh my God. And he doesn't even get the words out. She's going, yes, 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 yes. And he goes, well, wait, let me ask. And so he goes, would you marry me? She goes, oh my God, I've been waiting 5.5 months for you to say this. And he goes, I'm so happy. And she's crying and everything. He goes, oh, okay, wait a second. And she goes, what? He goes, there's only one small thing I got to talk to you about. We're going to get married one day at a time. So if it works today, awesome. We'll get married tomorrow. Okay. So now, Tim, how many women in that situation are going to be ecstatic about getting married and committed one day at a time?
Probably not many.
Probably not many is right? So when we go into recovery, I want to go in with a full-blown permanent recovery mindset. Now, it might take some of my clients a month or 2 months to catch up with the permanent part of it, which is fine. But that's the ultimate where we get everyone that I work with. Everyone gets to the point of being permanent. And the power of permanent recovery, I can share right now. 4.5 years ago, my mom came down with dementia at the worst level possible. And Tim, I have worked with every disease in the world, and the two worst ones are Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS, in my opinion, and deep dementia. My parents were married for 71 years, for God's sake. And, to have your wife of 71 years look at you and say, who the hell are you? Get out of my house right now on a regular basis is so destructive and so difficult for a family to go through. My mom went through that for 4 years before she died. It was painstaking. And then my dad, a year later, died. I will tell you this. In the 6 years of my parents, they were both in hospice for 2 years. They were both sick as could be, and just horrendous to see what they had to go through, the pain. There was not one time that I ever thought about having a drink. It just never entered my mind. It never even raised its head like, okay, this has been 3 years. It would be great to have a glass of wine and just chill. It never even came up as a thought. And that's permanent recovery. That's what anyone can have. I have no gift. Trust me, I've got a lot of problems. Okay. I have no gift to allow me to talk about permanent recovery and the benefits other than the experience of not just myself permanently recovered, but my clients. In the book that you talked about, Tim, I'm just going to hold it up, David Essel's Permanent Alcohol and Life Recovery. We tell a story of an executive who was a raging alcoholic for years, making tons of money, all the toys, all the everything. And then he came into the program. And I had told him on the second week that it was permanent. I said, we're going through this thing. This isn't a, what do they do? Sober January or some nonsense, type of stuff like that. I said, we're not messing around. You have enough experience proving that alcohol is a major problem in your life, and I have people write down all the problems they've had with any addiction. And then when they see it on paper, they go, yeah, it's probably time to get permanently recovered, because I've done this for
the one thing I want to say, I understand your point, permanent recovery. I mean, hey, I've been sober. I would call it permanent for me. However, the one day at a time just makes it, playing the devil's advocate, or not the devil's advocate, but, the one day at a time, just staying sober today is a lot easier than thinking I'm going to stay sober for eternity. That's the, my thinking is like, hey, I'm going to be sober. I'm sober. I don't drink. And that's today. And then I'm going to do that same thing every single day. I think as much just to think about the thought of being a permanent. I don't know. I don't know if it seems like it would be too big of a bite to chew off at the very beginning. I don't know. I don't know if it would ever be. I don't know. I don't know. How long does it take before you can say I'm permanently recovered? I don't know.
Well, that's one I mentioned earlier. There are some people that at 4 weeks, we start talking about permanent. Yeah. And some people at 6 weeks. I wait until I get them into a mindset where that they're capable and ready to handle this. But, my concern with one day at a time is that there isn't a commitment. It's one day. I'm committing myself one day. That's it. just like I gave with the marriage example. I want people to understand. And let me mention this, Tim. Is someone that really has struggled with addiction and do the exercise I just said, I want you to list your addiction story. I want you to list all the crap you got into, how many hangovers over the years. I'm going to take you deep. There's someone that did this exercise for me 6 months ago. It was a 30-page story. And then I said to him, we're going to read it together in our session. I don't care how long it takes, right? And then at the end of it, I said, okay, is there any room for alcohol in your life after reading that 30-page story? Why wouldn't you want to permanently recover? What would the reason be that you don't want to permanently recover? After creating all this hell in your life and other people's lives, what would be the justification to not go permanent? I would love to know that. I would love to know why someone wouldn't want to after seeing their own story and writing that all the hell that they went through. I would hope that people would say, geez, that makes sense. It's only logical.
What is the role that the subconscious mind plays in the world of addiction and recovery?
The subconscious is everything. How many people have you run into, Tim, and how many times did you do this? I can tell you I did this 1,000 times where consciously I woke up and said, that's it. All right, this is the last hangover. I'm not doing this anymore, right? And then 4 days later, 2 days later, 24 hours later, we're having a drink. All right, now, is that the conscious mind? Probably not. The conscious mind just made a decision, maybe a weak one, but a decision. That's it, I'm done. I'm not drinking anymore. And yet we drink again. Same thing with a food addict, same thing with a sex addict, same thing with a gambling. It doesn't matter. All addictions are the same in my mindset. So we have this thing going on that says, hey, I have this issue. I have this problem, and I need to get myself out of it. How do I do that? How do I get myself out of this issue? And when we look at all of the addictions that are out there that are rising faster than everything, there's a famous liver transplant surgeon out of Aurora, Colorado, and his quote is in our book, and I can't remember his name right now, but he says that alcoholism, Dr. James Burton, alcoholism, he's one of the top liver transplant doctors in the US, is the largest problem, the largest addiction in America today, destroying families, destroying careers. Tim, so we do look at it differently, without a doubt. The subconscious mind is where the work really has to be done. Now, the subconscious can be an ally or a saboteur, and we teach it to be an ally or a saboteur. It's all up to us. The subconscious mind cannot tell you that you're going to go and have a drink if you hadn't already implanted that you have a drink every night at 8 o'clock. So as I implant in my brain for all those years, every night, my last session is 8 o'clock. At 8:01, I have a drink. Now I have implanted a pattern into my subconscious that unless I do something really radical after a number of years of following that pattern, that subconscious is just going to rationalize, defend, deny, justify why it's okay to have a drink now. That's the subconscious mind, right? So we go deep and we try to figure out what are all of the excuses, what are all the lines, what are all the justifications or denials that we have used in my cousin only gets married once in his lifetime. What are all the things that we've used that we need to write down on paper, and when they come up, have a tool available in recovery to discount that? It might be cognitive behavioral therapy. It might be something called the Sedona method that we teach. I mean, there's all kinds of different tools that when the subconscious starts to get our attention, hey, you just put in 14 hours a day. You haven't drank in 3 weeks. Oh my God, you deserve, just have a beer. Now we have to have an antidote to that, because that subconscious mind, which we have trained, is only doing what we've told it to do. It can't do it on its own. Now, the same thing as a recovery. When you get into recovery, and in our belief system, recovery starts at 365 days of sobriety. So at 365 days where you haven't cross-addicted, you haven't relapsed, we are now in full-blown recovery. And what we have found in our practice, Tim, is that it takes at least that amount of time working a program, not just not drinking or not doing drugs for 365 days, but actually in a program to understand your origin, to understand solutions. We believe that is where we can help people the most, is getting them past that 365. And I'll tell you, and I write about this in the book, my first 365 of recovery was very difficult. And that's a lot of it was because of the fact that we had so many issues that I didn't know how to deal with. So my anxiety went nuts when I got home from the treatment center. My depression went crazy when I got home. Now, a lot of that was in the subconscious patterns I had carried that I didn't even know I carried. Since that time, and we teach this to clients, there's many ways to deal with these mental challenges without pharmaceuticals in some cases. In some cases, drugs are needed, and I'm not anti-drug at all. But there are so many other tools we have out there to deal with anxiety, depression, PTSD, trauma. And we want people to know that there is a myriad of tools out there to help you get wherever you want to get. And in our opinion, permanently recovered from any addiction, no matter how long you've struggled with it.
Awesome. We're coming up to the end of the hour here. Is there a question that you wanted me to ask you today?
Tim, I've never been asked that before. That's fascinating. Let me think. Is there a question? You've asked so many awesome questions. What is the most important tool in recovery?
What is the most important tool in recovery?
Learning the art of emotional regulation. Learning how to deal with life and to regulate your emotions when things aren't going your way or you're bored. Or, Tim, something I didn't even mention that a lot of times addictions are ramped up when great things happen, right?
Definitely.
We're going to celebrate the raise.
I like that. The art of emotional regulation. I don't know if I've ever heard that term or described that way, but it's the art. It is an art. It
is an art, Tim. It's an incredible art, and it's very creative and it's very individual. What tools will work with one person may not work with another, but emotional regulation is the end result. The art of it makes it sound even more important because it is that important to me,
Definitely. Where can people find you? Where can people connect with you if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah. Oh, it's so easy, Tim. TalkDavid.com is the website. All I do is talk. So the name is appropriate. TalkDavid.com. Just go there. You can actually download 3 of our top selling books for free at the website. And Tim, we offer everyone a free 20-minute session with me on the phone, no charge whatsoever. If they want to get we call it a jumpstart discovery session. If you want to get a jumpstart, just go to the website, fill in the form, and my team will get you lined up and we'll chat for 20 minutes, no charge at all. And don't forget, download the books. They're absolutely free.
Awesome. Okay, well, that does it for my time with David Essel today. David, thank you so much. I appreciate you. I got a lot out of it. And thank you, everyone else, for watching. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of I Love Being Sober. If you found this video to be of value, be sure to like it, subscribe to our channel if you want to see more videos, leave a comment if you have a question, if you've got something to say. Camelback Recovery provides treatment services for people struggling with mental health, mental illness, addiction, alcoholism. So if you or someone you know is struggling, be sure to reach out to us. You can go to our website, camelbackrecovery.com, or our information is in the comment section below. And we provide everything from detox, inpatient, outpatient treatment, sober living, recovery coaching, sober companion services. So either we'll be able to help you or we'll be able to refer you to people or treatment centers that might be a better fit. So I will see you in the next video.